We're excited today to have this webinar with Rob Lavoie of AirTerra. He's here to talk about biochar, composting, and agroforestry. There's a lot of interesting new developments to talk about today, so I'm sure there'll be lots of great questions. And yeah, with all that out of the way, Rob, I'll just pass things over to you and you can get started.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I'm going to share my screen here, and then I'm going to actually put it into presentation mode if I can. Right there. Okay, so you should be seeing the presentation, correct? Yeah, okay. So thank you, Maria. I appreciate that introduction, and I'm glad to be here with you today, and I hope we have enough time at the end of the session for you to share your comments. So again, just reiterate that, so please put them in the chat for later. So I'll just begin. Although I was born on a farm and have farmed with my dad for a number of years, my career is in petroleum engineering. That means that I always benefit from discussions with people who know agriculture and forestry. So please, point that out. Point out wherever you see any issues, as in the chat, etc. I started in 1980 with Shell Canada, followed by 6 years at TC Energy, followed by 20 years of consulting. But I was focused a lot on geological CO2 sequestration and enhanced oil recovery with carbon dioxide, and the oil and gas reserves assessments through my consulting career. So as mentioned in my bio, I began working on enhanced oil recovery, but I've now turned my attention to enhanced soil recovery, which is a little bit of an interesting twist. So this slide illustrates how carbon is currently captured in agriculture and forestry. The carbon cycle involves growing biomass and then composting it back into soil. And most of that carbon is in the form of decompostable organics that eventually return to the atmosphere. The more we till and work the land and leave it exposed to oxygen, the faster the carbon oxidizes back into the atmosphere. Somewhere between 10 to 20% of annual human-generated greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture and forestry. And now, having said this, I hope you don't take this as a finger pointing at you, because there are at least 3 or more fingers pointing back at me based on my life in the oil and gas industry. However, this presentation is focused on a rethink of this entire situation. So now, before I move on, I'd like to take a moment just to introduce what might be a new word to some folks, and that word is biochar. So a biochar is a charcoal-like material made from biomass in a way that benefits soils and plants. And you can see its microscopic structure here, which is relevant to this conversation. This is what it actually looks like. It's screened to about the size of grains of rice. And so that's what the photograph shows. There's nothing new about this material. Indigenous people in almost every continent have been producing charcoal for centuries and millennium. Archaeologists discovered that the Amazonians used it as a soil productivity enhancer in the tropical rainforests of Brazil over 2,000 years ago. And during the Second World War, Germany used the same technology to produce fuel for their military. So how is it made? It starts out as atmospheric CO2 that is naturally converted into plant material. We currently make use of residual forest industry wood as our feedstock and subject it to a high temperature in the near absence of oxygen, a chemical process known as pyrolysis. So another new word, but that's basically what it is, heating in the absence of oxygen. This drives off all of the volatile tars, oils, and hydrogen molecules in the form of a synthetic gas that leaves behind a fixed carbon that is highly resilient to decomposition when it's amended into soil. But fully 70% of the energy value of the original feedstock is driven off in the form of a synthetic gas, of which only 20% is needed to heat the process. Also, 50% of the carbon is driven off in the form of syngas as well. So, but we'll talk about the syngas and what happens to it later. For now, it's important to know that 50% of the original carbon is retained in the biochar. So now back to what I'm going to call the table of contents of this conversation. The radical rethink for establishing long-term carbon permanency in soils is to make use of biochar as a soil restructuring agent. We also believe that there is now economic value for amendments of biochar into the composting process to generate high-value agricultural soil amendments and several other products. Once biochar is amended into soils, there are now several international carbon credit protocols available to internalize its climate change mitigation value in addition to its agricultural value. So why is this so important? For that, I need to make one more deviation to this narrative to have a look at how powerful Mother Nature truly is. This chart is known as the Keeling curve, based on the work of Charles Keeling in the 1950s, when he began measuring CO2 concentrations on the top of a dormant volcano in Hawaii called Mount Mauna Loa. This chart has atmospheric CO2 concentrations in parts per million on the y-axis against time on the x-axis. Think of this curve as though it represents the Earth taking breaths. 1 breath per year, CO2 in during the summer months, and CO2 out in the fall, winter, and spring of each year. Plants do an incredible job of converting CO2 into carbon that they use to grow their leaves, stems, and branches. But during the fall, winter, and spring, the flow of CO2 is reversed. When plants in the northern hemisphere stop growing and the rate of decomposition takes over. There is a large proportion of plants in the northern hemisphere, so larger proportion in the northern hemisphere, so the cycle is aligned with it. Now, each April of the year, we reach a new global record high CO2 concentration, currently at about 420 parts per million. Unfortunately, even though Mother Nature is so powerful, it can actually bend the CO2 concentrations down every single year, as you can see from this sawtooth curve. We are adding so much more to the atmosphere on a yearly basis that the net effect is a significant increase over the past 64 years. These records began the year I was born, 1958. Do the math. If we do this for another 64 years, we'll be well over the scientifically stated maximum safe level of 450 parts per million. In fact, we'll probably get there sometime between 2030 and 2040. And this chart shows the CO2 concentrations measured from sea ice that is stored in trapped air bubbles over the past 10,000 years. During these years, humans developed all of the current methods of agriculture on the planet. Adapting to recent severe climate events resulting from the recent step change in CO2 concentrations is going to be a challenge. This is the reason for current financial markets becoming very interested in deep investments in technologies that work towards reversing this trend. So back to our table of contents for this talk. In the first part of the webinar, we'll review agroforestry practices that could double as a feedstock source for producing biochar that would remove some of the CO2 from our atmosphere with a greater degree of permanency. Rural Routes to Climate Solutions has published many podcasts and webinars on this topic, starting in episode 4 with an interview with Gary Banks, a former federal researcher in this area, and then jumping to episode 32, which provides an enlightening talk between Derek Leahy and Noel St. Jean of the Agroforestry Woodlot Extension Society, or Oz. And then episode 15 with Christine Campbell of Alternative Land Use Services, or ALICE. And then episode 25 with Ron Rizuka, a farmer near Killam, Alberta, sharing his leadership in agroforestry practices. We'll also look at short rotation coppice harvesting of wood fiber as a way of leveraging each of the practices listed here. Shelter belts, to begin with, may become important for farmers as a result of ever increasing wind speeds throughout the year, longer heat domes in the summer. Shelter belts and trees in general provide protection from these things. Moreover, 50% of precipitation in a given year comes during the winter months as snow. But 60 to 70% of snow moisture is lost with every 200 to 300 meters of snowdrift distance. This is because of sublimation, water going from a solid phase to a gas phase without first needing to melt. And Derek gives a great explanation of this in episode 32. Trees provide great habitats for beneficial predators, pollinators, and can increase yields, for example, canola and alfalfa by, in the order of 30 to 50% versus just relying on wind or for pollination. Soil losses during the winter and wind erosion are vastly reduced, and wood fiber can be harvested, possibly, and sold as a cash crop. Lastly, but germane to this presentation, carbon credits can be realized through the conversion of wood fiber into biochar for soil amendments. As discussed in episode 4 and 32, eco-buffers offer an even more intensive biodiversity option in agroforestry practices. There is a large volume of knowledge related to this practice available on the internet. The question I'm raising in this webinar is how this kind of practice can be integrated with a harvestable crop of wood fiber to supplement farm income and eco benefits. One of the additional benefits I see with eco buffers, even if not for harvestable wood, is the potential to stimulate a very healthy microbiology that can be cultured for use in other aspects of developing organic farming practices. If there is an appetite for a greater number of trees on the farm, alley cropping is an option where trees are placed in rows that are far enough apart to allow equipment to have access to work on crops in between them. This is a possible ideal case for planting short rotation coppice harvested willow, as an example. Also, silvopasture. I'm just relying on Wikipedia here as a trailhead for information on this topic, but silvopasture has been around for centuries, but may be even more important today as a way of capturing carbon and taking advantage of all the aspects I've already discussed or above. Another form of agroforestry beginning to be used in Alberta is short rotation coppice willow plantations. With modern hybrid poplar species, these plantations can produce about 3.2 tons each year of wood fiber per acre of land, or about 10 times the wood fiber available from conventional forestry practices. So to provide the feedstock for commercial biochar production facility of somewhere in the order of 25,000 tons of feedstock per year, we would need about 7,800 acres of land, or about 12 sections of willow plantation would be required. A commercial scale plant of this size would be able to generate 5,000 tons per year of biochar for soil amendment. Silvus Environmental was hired by the City of Calgary to manage an 865 acre willow plantation for short rotation coppice harvesting of wood fiber for the city's municipal composting facility. The site is located near Kioma, Alberta, and the city composts its own biosolids as a source of nutrients for the site. If full sections of land are dedicated to growing short rotation coppice harvested wood fiber on a 3 to 4 year cycle, a total of 12 sections of land out of 576 sections of land on a region equal to about 16 townships, about 2% of the land area would be required to provide the feedstock for a 5,000 ton per year commercial biochar plant. If agroforestry were applied in one of the 3 models shown here, the number of sections required to be developed over each 16 township region with trees planted around the boundaries of each quarter. So I'm talking about these boundaries here. So this would be one section, and then these are the quarters. So putting trees onto those boundaries. On those boundaries would require about 165 sections if all you did was the shelter belts with about a 20-meter wide rows, or about 110 sections with 30-meter wide eco buffers in this model, or 35 sections of the 16 township region with 576 sections. If you were to do more intense alley cropping of trees for the farm, that would have about 40 meters for crops between the alleys. So annual production of 25,000 tons of wood fiber for each commercial sized, I just want to underline that, these are large biochar production facilities, could be supplied this way. Farmers and ranchers would then have a circular economy with the biochar facility supplying 5,000 tons of biochar per year. We think this could be doable, but we're truly seeking input and advice from farmers and ranchers to help us develop this concept. So back to the table of contents. Let's move on to learn more about the biochar itself. So because biochar is a casting of the original woody biomass's cellular structure, there are 3 ways that biochar benefits soils. So physically, biochar has a high porosity, holds on to moisture, and a high surface area that retains nutrients, and a high carbon content that is resilient to decomposition, giving it permanency when amended into soils. Chemically, the high surface area has both positive and negative charges that hold on to ionized nutrients that are more plant available. Biologically, because of the combination of its moisture and nutrient saturated pores, it serves as a beneficial microbial habitat that also protects bacteria from predators and stimulates bacteria growth because of its electrical conductivity, which is needed by microbial growth, by microbial bodies. So how is biochar used? Well, blending biochar into various forms of animal bedding, feed, compost, and also blending it in with organic and/or chemical fertilizers works to retain nutrients, to reduce required fertilizer inputs, enhance soil structure with carbon, and stimulate plant growth with beneficial soil microbes. One of the most informative research papers recently written on this topic, I'll just have some water. Is provided here. I hope you can see this. Maybe if you get a transcript of the recording, you'll be able to read it more carefully. This was a meta-study of meta-studies on biochar's proven beneficial uses over the past couple decades. This paper compiles peer-reviewed research demonstrating improved soil conditions for plant productivity on several different parameters, such as overall plant productivity, crop yield, photosynthetic rate, water use efficiency, root and biomass, root biomass and length, soil microbial biomass, bacteria abundance and fungi abundance, and available nitrogen and phosphorus. So all of the bars that are heading towards the right indicate greater than 0 benefit or a change to the norm, to the controls. And you can also see the number of papers that were reviewed to arrive at these statistics. So 1,254 papers, 1,125, as you can see on this right-hand side. The bars leaning to the left are for things like leaching of nitrates. So colored bars going to the left are for the reduction in nitrogen leaching and reductions in heavy metal availability. So biochar can be used to immobilize heavy metals in contaminated soils as well. So these would be negative benefits to soil. So it's good that they're leaning to be less than 0. So in other words, that's a positive factor. The paper also identifies several other biochar benefits. So I'd recommend it if you are interested in reading more about that. So let's now move on to having a look at how biochar can be used beneficially on the farm. Our first recommendation is to use biochar as an animal bedding ingredient, as a way to enhance the value of manure compost. Biochar used initially in animal beddings improves animal health conditions, absorbs the nutrients from the animal bedding and other farm organics going into the bedding, and improves the composting process for the bedding, which increases plant available nutrients, and when amended into farmland, generates a resilient, carbon-rich soil, improved plant productivity, moisture retention, and provides disease resistance for plants because of the microbial population in the compost. These photos provided by one of our customers, Ron Steinke of New Sarepta, demonstrates its use in cattle sheds in the bottom, in cattle sheds, and in the bottom right, down in this corner, is an example of a poultry chicken coop on the newly developed and about to be expanded Amigo Carbon Ranch, which is the former Rocky View Hutterite colony in the Rocky View County. When the bedding is spent, it's composted in the normal way farmers have been composting spent bedding for decades. So Ron Steinke uses a large manure spreader. He actually has a larger one now, but this is one in action to generate the compost pile that are very effective at composting the bedding, especially with the biochar blended into that bedding in terms of making that compost pile. There are now a number of examples of using biochar as an ingredient in poultry litters, which have demonstrated the ability to reduce nitrogen losses by absorbing ammonia and improving indoor air conditions for the birds and people. Wood-based biochar performs very well for this absorption of ammonia. A number of authors of papers are referenced demonstrating reductions in losses of nitrogen. Steiner et al. Of 2010 observed a 64% increase in total nitrogen retention with 20% by volume biochar addition to the bedding. Another paper, Jansek, in 2017 demonstrated an increase in the amount of biochar going from 5 to 10% by weight into the bedding, reduced ammonia emissions by 30 to 44%, respectively. All papers demonstrated the importance of the pH, this carbon to nitrogen ratio, and the biochar's surface chemistry on ammonia absorption capacity. When biochar is allowed to when ammonia is allowed to volatilize from the bedding, the nitrogen content is lost to the atmosphere and the phosphorus is concentrated. This causes an imbalance in the nitrogen phosphorus ratio when applied as an organic fertilizer and nearly renders both remaining nitrogen and phosphorus to leach into groundwaters and rivers and lakes. Biochar can be added to manures after cleaning the barns, but by then it's almost too late to maintain that nitrogen phosphorus balance because of too much nitrogen has been lost. So the biochar can prevent the nitrogen from being lost if it's used during the bedding process, so while the animals are using it. If you'd like to learn more about this, I would recommend having a read of Kelpie Wilson's website. That's Wilson's and Associates website. And she has documented the use of biochar in animal bedding quite well and has some great advice for its application. So this paper was actually a turning point for me personally in our journey with AirTerra, the company that we have that is now marketing biochar across Canada. But we have it actually made for us, so we're not making it currently, but the plan is to make it. But it was this paper that got us, put us on the track of realizing how important it is to co-compost biochar with organics. And so it's the organic coatings on biochar that occur when you co-compost it. is really the important point in this paper. It was authored by Nicholas Hegelman and a number of other very prominent names in the biochar space. Here's the chart that really kind of blew me away. This is just 2 bar graphs. One of them shows a pristine particle of biochar that demonstrates it has no nutrients attached to it. That's the way biochar is coming out of the kiln. It doesn't have any nutrients. You have to provide nutrients, okay? Just add nutrients, basically, is the way biochar comes out of the kiln. So this is a co-composted piece of biochar that they actually picked out of a compost pile with biochar co-composted, which shows nitrates having attached itself to the surfaces of that biochar piece. But very interestingly, this is the nitrates that are being extracted in the lab using a potassium chloride solution to extract the nitrate. And you can see there's the green bar, there's a green bar and then a red bar, sorry. A green bar, then a red, it goes to green, blue, yellow, and red. And all of these are shown on the legend in the bottom. And this demonstrates how many hours of soaking with the potassium chloride was required. So all the green, red, and light green, that was a 1 hour soak. And then going beyond, at a 20-hour soak or a 48 or 96, additional nitrate was being removed from that piece of biochar, demonstrating its ability to work like a slow release kind of fertilizer and to retain and hold on to those nutrients rather than allow them to be leached away when we have torrential rains or wet events, etc., in the field. So this really highlighted how beneficial it is to co-compost biochar when using it agriculturally. So Don Harfield, my VP of Technology and Operations for AirTerra, and I spoke into the Alberta Environment's recent review of its code of practice for composting facilities. And we were able to have the biochar included as an acceptable amendment for all large and small scale composting facilities in Alberta. This newly amended code of practice went into effect earlier in January of this year. We always recommend nutrient charging and microbial inoculation of biochar. That's best done as a co-composting process. This ensures that adequate nutrients have been applied along with the biochar. If it's not done, the biochar can absorb nutrients from an already nutrient deficient soil until it is charged fully, which can cause a short-term nutrient deficiency for plants. It is much better to begin with fully nutrient charged biochar. One way is to just blend biochar into finished compost, but then it takes a little while for those organic coatings to appear. And so that can be delayed. That's a better way is to co-compost the biochar as an ingredient in the composting process itself. That happens naturally when biochar is used as an ingredient in animal bedding. If animals are not available on the farm, no worries. There's a number of ways of making use of biochar in green manure from cover crops or from cover crop residual or crop residuals to conserve the nutrients associated with these organics as well. It may also be possible to partner with local municipalities to have access to municipal organics to co-compost the biochar in. Based on research conducted at the University of Lethbridge as well by Alberta ranchers and researchers, biochar added to ruminants increases animal health and weight gain, feed use efficiency, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions from the animals. The nutrient density of the manure compost generated by this practice is further increased as well. So we're hoping that AirTerra's ability to generate a low cost and consistently high quality biochar product will increase demand for such a product. Biochar used as a feed ingredient is already seeing widespread use in Europe, and biochar for animal feed is currently limited in the US and Canada, but we know of at least 2 manufacturers in Canada making this product available as a feed ingredient. It requires registration with Canada Health, and we know that some of the manufacturers have already received that registration. Recent research at the University of Lethbridge by Dr. Carlos Romero and Tim McAllister demonstrate that biochar, as an addition to cattle feed, reduces greenhouse gas emissions from cattle and during the manure composting process. As well. Activated carbon has been used as a pharmaceutical for animals for many decades. Just have to clear my throat. So animal feed, very much a possibility, but in summary, co-composted biochar is a highly effective and beneficial product for soil amendment. Moreover, to take advantage of all biochar's benefits, it must be microbially inoculated and nutrient charged. Biochar can be used in a series of stacked functions, such as a deodorant, an air quality enhancer in barns, as a sponge to capture volatilizing or dissolved nutrients, and as an enhancement for animal health in animal bedding and feed, and as a co-composting enhancer. Other trailheads that are listed in this slide, which I would never have time to really cover, but I'm just putting them out here because each one of these areas, which are already being employed, could also explore and benefit from the potential for co-composting with biochar. So that's Korean natural farming, farmer managed natural regeneration for the growth of trees, Johnson Sewer bioreactors, fermentative composting, anaerobic biodigestion, and even using mushroom substrates for the growing from poultry litter that has been amended with biochar. So these are all the implications. I'm just trying to outline kind of the implications of how biochar could be, that has been co-composted or used as an animal bedding, could be used in each one of those scenarios. So let's move to having a look at the economics of producing and using biochar in a circular economy on farms. First of all, current small-scale production renders it economically difficult for agriculture to use. So large-scale production reduces the cost of biochar and increases its economic feasibility. To do this, we need to internalize the value streams associated with biochars being amended into soil. So every ton of biochar amended into soil will command about 3 tons of carbon credits. So right now, the carbon credit price on carbon is about $50 a ton, and it's projected to increase to $170 per ton by 2030. At $170 a ton, each ton of biochar amended into soils would be worth about $510 of carbon credits per ton of biochar. So every 10,000 ton biochar production will produce about, as well as for the carbon credits, will also co-produce 200 million standard cubic feet of renewable natural gas in the processes that we're investigating, and 10,000 tons of high purity CO2 for use possibly in the built environment or for geological sequestration. So our plans are, we desire to work with local farmers on 16 townships radius from each commercial scale biochar facility. The feedstocks would come from locally grown wood fiber at about 25 to 50 kilometer radius of each plant. Initially, residual wood would come from the forest industry and municipalities, but a transition to agroforestry would enable sourcing short rotation coppice harvested, maybe shelter belts, eco buffers, or alley crop trees, wood fiber for the biochar plant. Commercial production facilities of 5,000 tons of biochar per year would enable a cost of about $500 per ton of biochar. And 1 ton of biochar addition per acre results in an increase of soil organic carbon of about 1% at 4 inches of depth. The biochar could be used on farms for animal bedding to absorb moisture and reduce airborne nitrogen and methane emissions. Ideally, it would then be used over in the region of about 25 to 50 kilometers radius from the biochar plant. So locally made and locally used and locally sourced product is what we're trying to achieve here, ideally. Co-composted bedding results in a nutrient-dense, microbially enhanced compost for field application. Field applications of co-composted biochar manure would be used to increase the quality, could be used to increase the quality of marginal land. So when we're advocating, what we're advocating is a virtuous cycle where production of biochar at scale results in a higher deployment and a reduction in price to increase its competitiveness in new agricultural markets, resulting in greater demand and the construction of larger future production facilities and so forth. In conclusion, I would like to give you an overview of a biochar production facility that could be constructed at a large enough scale to be economic. Each commercial scale plant would have the following characteristics. It would require about 25,000 tons of wood fiber feedstock. It would generate 5,000 tons of biochar and generate about 200 million standard cubic feet of renewable natural gas, or the equivalent converted to hydrogen as well. The conversion process of the syngas to RNG could generate 10,000 tons of CO2, a very pure stream of CO2. And that CO2 could be used or sold to be used in the built environment or sequestered geologically. This would amount to over 20,000 tons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere per commercially operational biochar facility. The production facilities we're envisioning will source feedstock initially from urban and forest industry residuals, because we don't have enough agroforestry going at the moment, but eventually from purpose-grown trees that are possibly coppice harvested from willow plantations, shelter belts, or eco buffers, or algae crops, and so forth. These residuals would be processed by a biochar kiln that produces a high-quality biochar product. Typical biochar production facilities incinerate the syngas that comes off the process, but remember that this represents 70% of the energy content of the original feedstock, so it's not a very efficient thing to do. The biochar production technologies will eventually be capable of converting the syngas into pipeline spec drop-in renewable natural gas that can be delivered to any of Alberta's many natural gas receipt stations, or converted to hydrogen for Alberta's future hydrogen economy. The pyrolysis system we're seeking will separate a high purity CO2 product that can be captured for sale as an ingredient for building materials, or can be sequestered geologically. These additional sales streams represent additional product revenue streams and carbon credits. This is a unique business model in the biochar world and could become the standard globally to maximize carbon dioxide removal potential while generating renewable energy that can be transported in existing pipeline systems. The high quality biochar is then used on farms as an animal feed or animal bedding ingredients that enhance animal health, improve weight gain, and the farmer's composting process, and improves efficiency of use of chemical fertilizers used on farmland, or for horticulture and industrial site reclamation. Many unique patentable agricultural products will emerge when commercial, low-cost, high-quality biochar is available in this way. Each of the physical products, biochar, RNG, hydrogen, or CO2 sales, will have carbon credits associated with them. And biochar amended into soils is recognized as a carbon dioxide removal technology and commands a premium carbon credit value. Renewable natural gas and hydrogen sale prices are actually commanding a 4 or 5 times price premium over fossil natural gas. There are several global carbon market platforms listed on this slide that are now available for the sale of these products, and more significantly, they can be pre-sold on a conditional basis to support the financing of future production facilities. The commercial scale and multiple revenue streams of our planned facility reduces biochar costs for our customers. We believe farmers are becoming interested in agroforestry for its climate change adaptation benefits, as well as its economic viability. And we're working towards farmers having the option to provide feedstock from trees grown on their own land in a true circular economy with the biochar facility. To be clear, there's probably no place better situated to model these concepts than Alberta. Alberta is clearly at the intersection of forestry, energy, and agriculture, and represents a unique opportunity to showcase these climate change mitigation adaptation solutions to the rest of the world. So we believe in working towards a profitable soil regeneration solution that uses agroforestry to remove CO2 from our atmosphere and convert harvested wood fiber into highly beneficial soil amendment biochar in a virtuous cyclical economy with farmers and ranchers. But we don't have all the answers, and we seek to work with the agricultural community towards generating healthy soils, clean water, and removing carbon from the atmosphere for healthy plants, nutritious food, and a sustainable planet. Thank you for your attention, and I am open to any questions.
Thanks so much, Rob. We do have some questions in the chat box. So
Okay.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of good questions that were flying up in there as you were presenting. So I will, I'm just going to go scroll through here and start at the beginning and end at the end here of all these questions. But if anybody has a question right now for Rob and you want to unmute yourself and just speak up and ask, feel free to do that as well.
So we're going to start at the top, or?
Yeah, so here I'll ask, I don't hear anyone piping up. So one question was, are you comfortable sharing a PDF of your slides?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. If you want to send those to me in an email afterwards, and I can share that with everybody on the call today. And then we can.
Lost you.
Slides. What's that?
I lost you there.
Oh, did you? Oh, it looks like I'm having some internet issues. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, yeah, sorry. It looks like I just had a little notification pop up saying my internet was unstable. So yeah, if you want to send those PDFs to me in an email, Rob, and then I will share them with the group.
Absolutely.
We can all have those PDFs. Okay, so that was the first question, easy, out of the way. Next question was, okay, here we go. Okay, here we are. So does biochar act as absorbent for toxic chemicals in the soil? Is this a way to reduce poisonous chemicals that have been applied to kill plants and insects, especially glyphosate, known to cause cancer?
Yes, that's a very intense topic of research, and it's definitely being used to immobilize heavy metals. That's one of the things that biochar has quite an affinity for. I'm not sure about insecticides and glyphosate. That's not something I have knowledge of. Maybe some of the like heavy metal components of these things, if there are any, would be immobilized by biochar. But it is something that's being researched. We'd have to be quite specific as to which chemicals we're actually talking about to be able to answer that question. But there is a great deal of research. If anybody's interested, I can provide some of that at a future date as well.
Yeah. Why don't you send that along in that email
Sure.
with the PDF slides, and I can share that with everyone, because that's very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Is there a current program or market concept in place to support farmers switching to agroforestry systems? So the upfront costs are large in terms of purchasing trees and loss of averages. Secondly, what scale of project would be needed to implement the circular biochar coppicing model? And could this be done at a municipal level, or would it be like provincial or federal support needed? I know there was a lot of questions in there, so we can go back if you need to.
Yeah, no. So it's great. These are great questions. And there is a program that the federal government has begun, which is called the 2 billion tree program.
Okay.
And we know of at least one Indigenous organization that has a tree nursery that is making trees available for agroforestry and is subsidizing that tree program with the grant that's being made available through the 2 billion tree program.
Okay.
So there are ways to combine these programs that are being made available as climate change mitigation programs in Canada. So that's beginning to be available.
Awesome.
The upfront costs are large. Yes, that's very likely.
Mhm.
These are long-term investments, and we're looking at environmental benefits to the farm that are becoming more and more necessary because of the severe weather events that we're dealing with in the summers, heat and that sort of thing. So making the land more resilient could be potentially economic at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I found, as you were talking, I found a link to the 2 billion trees program. So I threw it in the chat box for anybody that's interested.
Cool. And so we are looking for farmers who and ranchers who would like to discuss the possibility of collaborating, and because there's power in numbers, right? I mean, if we can get enough people together to demonstrate a need for this type of intervention, both from a climate perspective and from an agricultural economics perspective, we might be able to, put projects together that benefit from that, cooperative approach to things. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. All right, so next question. What are the economics of using biochar as an enhancer or alternative after inoculation and nutrient turning?
Well, that's something that we need much more demonstration on. So,
okay.
It's something that we're in the nascent period of time here to identify those economics. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, I have another question here. This is from Martin. Does pyrolysis emit a lot of CO2? With the presence of moisture, are there any risks of fermentation and fire for use as bedding or during storage and transportation?
So, as I mentioned, the pyrolytic process does generate what's called synthetic gases and coming off the process. And if you combust those synthetic gases, yes, there will be CO2 as a result of combusting them. But some of the processes that we're looking at will actually convert the synthetic gases to a renewable form of energy. In fact, even potentially hydrogen is being explored, and will generate a very high purity stream of CO2, which could be also captured at a very low cost, and either sequestered geologically or used in the built environment. There's some examples of using carbon dioxide that's been captured as a cement ingredient, for example, and other built environment uses. Yeah. So these are things that we're pursuing as well.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, this is a question from Philip. And Philip, if we need you to explain a little further, I'll just have you unmute. But so please explain the actions of biochar. Is it chemical or mechanical, or is it biochemistry? And if we need further clarification, we can ask Philip on that.
So okay, I'm just sort of.
Or are you looking through the chat box as well?
I am, yeah.
So it's Philip Van Hoff.
Okay. You're talking about the one about does biochar act as an absorbent or toxin?
No,
that we already did that.
Yeah, Philip is asking to explain the actions of biochar. Is it chemical or mechanical or biochemistry?
Oh, the actions of biochar, is it chemical or mechanical or biochemistry? Well, there's a physics aspect, in terms of the porosity and surface area of the biochar. There's a chemical aspect because of the electrical charges on the surfaces, which absorb nutrients, ionized nutrients. And the biochemistry part is that the biochar actually stimulates microbiology to grow in its pores and then to deposit organics on the biochar pieces.
There's just an emergency alert just popped up on my phone. I think I heard it on your end too, Rob.
All right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, there's a, oh, hold on. Sorry about this.
Oh, no problem.
I've got to do, I'm not getting, hold on. Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
I don't know how that happened, but anyway, it did. So yeah, so it's all three actually, physical,
Okay.
chemical, and biological.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, great questions so far, everyone. Keep putting them in the chat box if you have them. And great answers too, Rob. Thanks for clarifying all this stuff. So here's a question. This is from Janet, and it's about some of the pricing. It's a question about the pricing. So for your carbon credit estimate, the price of $50 per, I think that's ton, rising to $170 per ton. I think that's what the T stands for. Is only in the compliance market. So far, there isn't any offset protocol for biochar in the compliance market. So voluntary carbon market prices aren't $50 per ton and currently may only be around $15 to $20 at the highest. So can you further explain your pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. We need to work with the compliance markets to create those protocols. But in the voluntary markets, there definitely are these protocols, as pointed out. And the voluntary markets are starting to align themselves with these carbon prices. So, you know, we know that in some voluntary markets, the carbon removal credits are actually higher than these prices already, even today. So it's all kind of all over the map. It jumps around like a monkey. These carbon prices, but we're looking to lock them in with you know, conditional purchase orders in order to finance the plant, and that will help to reduce the cost of the biochar. Right.
Okay. So looks promising on the horizon.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a question from Deb. What would be the best timing to incorporate biochar into green manure? So if it's not being co-composted with animal manure ahead of application, would there be a reduction in those benefits when used only on the green manure?
So what we know is that farmers that have forage crops will put them in just before, just at the end of the growing season. So you have the maximum nitrogen in those forage crops right at the end of the growing season, and when they're sort of terminating in the fall, then the biochar that's on the ground with those forage crops will absorb nutrients and help to reduce the nitrogen volatilization. So it would be at the point in time where you have the maximum nitrogen in the plants, and the plants are about to be terminated. Okay. So that they would land on the ground where the char is, and the char would have the ability to absorb those nutrients. Okay. But it would actually be better if, when you are amending biochar into green manures, that you actually harvest the green manures and create a compost pile with them, and then add the biochar to those compost piles. And there are some companies doing this with farmers. One I can talk about is, or think of, is AirTerra out of Vernon, British Columbia, who do this on green manures. And they actually use a fermentative composting process with small covered, or they use a plastic material to encapsulate the green manure that's harvested, and then they fermentatively compost it. Well, that process would benefit from a biochar ingredient in the composting process as well. So these are all things that need experimentation and exploration. So it's a good question.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question, great answer. All right. Okay, so here's a question from Lorelei. Is there a resource with a comprehensive list of biochar suppliers or farmers who use it with their livestock and then sell the manure? We're just starting our organic farm north of Edmonton. Congratulations. And we'd like to start it off right.
I'd love to get a database of that sort together. Right now, I don't know of such a thing. There are farmers that are having their manure co-composted with biochar, but they use all of that manure on their own land.
Yeah.
And I've not actually seen cases where farmers are willing to sell their manure commercially because it's valuable for them to use on their own land. But again, it would be great to be able to compile a list that demonstrates who's maybe making these products available. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, especially as this area kind of picks up momentum for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, here's
it kind of demonstrates some demand right there.
Yeah, totally, doesn't it? Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
Right.
So this question is from Nicole. So she said, Rob mentioned remediation sites. What does the chemical makeup of the Compost willow biochar look like if it is to be used in a food production cycle?
Yeah, so the chemical makeup of the Compost willow is going to have this almost the same chemical makeup as biochar made from forest residuals, because what happens is you get a very high carbon content, and so it's mostly carbon in every single case when you're using a woody feedstock, especially willow. Willow is even a harder wood than some of the softwoods from our forest industry. So it's not going to be much different. It may have slightly different ash or pH, but from a carbon content, it's going to be right up there in the 70 to 80% carbon level. Again, we require more experiments on biochar making with Compost willow at this point. Yeah.
Okay. So here's another question. This is to do with willows as well. How much water, and yeah, maybe you can answer this. How much water would be used to do willow coppice crops? Could there be other impacts to regional agriculture food production if many farmers switch to agroforestry cropping for this purpose? Does the benefit for carbon sequestration? Okay, maybe we'll answer. We have a couple questions embedded in one. So let's start with the first one. Let's just talk about the water. Because that seems to always come up when we're talking about agroforestry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're not envisioning needing to do irrigation for these Compost willow plantations.
Awesome. Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's going to be more viable in the northern portions of Alberta than in the southern.
Okay.
But it all depends on the farmer's ability to make water available, or for the the water availability if it's necessary.
Yeah.
But once again, it might be more viable in northern Alberta than in southern Alberta from a water perspective.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Okay, so the next part of this question, do the benefits for carbon sequestration outweigh the impacts of potentially losing farmland to forestry and the CO2 release to cultivate and harvest these crops?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another great question, because it's really going to depend on whether farmers believe that it makes sense economically for them, whether this is something that they can do. But what I'm finding in the literature is that agroforestry actually has eco benefits for agriculture, you know, in terms of reduced wind speeds, more moisture because of the fact that you're not allowing the moisture in the soil to be desiccated by those winds, and actually reducing temperatures as well with the shade and the lower wind speeds from the trees themselves. there are a number of eco benefits to having the trees on the land. Is being sort of amplified by some of the weather events that we're seeing now.
Definitely,
So this is something, again, that farmers will need to manage those variables to see whether they would actually have a benefit for their particular farm. And there might be other ways in terms of using marginal land or fringe areas of the farm where trees could potentially be productive and harvested.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's always agroforestry always goes hand in hand with like the long-term resiliency.
Right. Yeah.
Because like these weather events every year they're getting there's just a lot of them now, right? So it's having those safeguards.
Yeah. And then the other question about CO2 released, the harvesting of coppice willow is actually a very efficient process. So we're not envisioning that the the scope 3 CO2 releases because of that additional activity is going to outpace the amount of carbon that's being sequestered back into the land with the biochar itself.
Okay. So here's another question, comment, food for thought, maybe. With the wood mills in the province, so they're scattered mainly along the north and the west of Alberta, would they be possible sources of wood matter for feedstock for the biochar facilities, or are they relying on combustion of the wood waste to help fuel and heat internal processes or cogen electricity? I know at least the mill nearby here is doing that with their wood matter. They're using it for cogen, but.
No, so the really great question. And from our understanding, we know that we could very likely source enough feedstock from existing forest industry activity.
Okay.
In the excess wood fiber that's available, residual wood fiber that's available from those activities. But what we're anticipating and we're planning for sustainability is that all of those resources are going to come under great pressure because more and more industries and are trying to make use of those resources. Yeah. And so there's going to be a great deal of competition to go with bioenergy sources. And we're seeing that, if we don't do things differently, we're not actually going to be able to have an impact on our CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. And the thing that really needs to be done differently is we need to grow more trees. So if it makes sense to grow trees agriculturally, then we would definitely want to tap into that as a resource and make it actually more economic to grow trees agriculturally by actually assigning a value to it.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so here's another question. This is more like an urban question about this topic. So with the larger municipal areas, such as like Calgary, Edmonton regions, would they generate large enough volumes of wood waste from urban horticultural trimmings and chippings to make it worthwhile to use as bio?
Answer is again excellent. And that's very much a feedstock is the urban residuals. Calgary has a very mature canopy, and there's a very large tonnage of residuals coming from that urban canopy, from arborist cuttings and trees that are being retired and all of those sorts of things. So yes, all the municipal areas. And then there's also fire smart zones and fire thinnings that make trees available. Definitely for populated areas, there is a large amount of feedstock coming out. But again, we see that those feedstocks will come under pressure for these bioenergy projects as well.
Yeah, okay. So here's a question.
And by the way, that's the reason that the technologies that we're seeking also combine bioenergy into as a byproduct of making the biochar.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's the future of a lot of the industrial processes around here are starting to incorporate that. They're looking for ways to capture as much of it as they can. Yeah. Okay, so this is a question about supply. So how much is a ton of biochar and where can I buy it?
Right now, a ton of biochar is in the vicinity of about $2,000.
Okay.
Okay, that's what it's costing now because it's being made by small facilities, so
Mhm.
not commercial scale at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
And where can you buy?
Yeah.
There's a company called BC Biocarbon. I'll shout out a few names. For
Okay.
example, there's one in Edmonton called ERSI, which is Innovative Reduction Strategies Inc.
Okay.
There's one in Saskatchewan, uh, uh, um, Titan Industries, Titan Energy, um, which is near. Anyway, it's a Saskatchewan company
Yeah.
making biochar. So yeah, I could put a few of those together as well for
Okay.
you.
Yeah. We can put those in that email for sure. Yeah. Great.
Okay.
And some comments on, there's some comments here about our little emergency alert interruption that we had.
Oh, did that come up for everybody at the same
I
time?
think so. I think it might have been an Alberta wide alert. I know when they happen, like it doesn't matter if your phone is muted or not. So I think most of us probably, if we were in Alberta, got that emergency alert.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing how they can blow through all of the, because I shut my cellular off completely.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it even comes through the TV. So it's, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
you can't ignore them when they happen for sure. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can explain. How does biochar compare with bokashi?
Yeah. Bokashi is a form of
Mm.
composting organics.
Oh,
And you
okay.
could use biochar in a bokashi process as an ingredient in the bokashi
In the
process.
bokashi. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it can be a component of bokashi.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that. I'll have to look up that term. Oh, here. Dieter had his hand up for a while. Do you have a question, Dieter, that you wanted to ask? Um,
I
I
actually put
just,
it. I actually put it
Yeah.
in the chat. But anyways, thanks, Rob, for
okay.
that great presentation.
Oh, you're
Yeah, what I liked in the beginning is that you actually make clear what biochar is, because there's sometimes this generic term of biochar, and you said wood and at certain temperatures. That was good. And I think some of the life cycle analysis questions were already asked by other listeners. So that was one of my major questions. But then I know, for example, that short-term coppice production is pretty hard on the soils. We'll ultimately need to do something here in the soil management and add probably nutrients. Now, my question is, are you aware of any studies that actually show what is the sweet window where the biochar to the soil is actually most beneficial? I guess that there's a certain point, because you can't endlessly add that material to the soil where it will probably actually have negative effects, and or even basically where the whole effects plateau at least.
Yeah, so a lot of depleted soils, carbon depleted soils exist now in North America. So I mean, we're down to in some cases 2 or 3% or even less carbon, soil organic carbon, and soils are actually most healthy up around 10 or 12 percent soil organic carbon. So we've got quite a long ways to go. It takes a ton of biochar to increase the soil organic carbon by 1% in over a full acre of land.
Well, the biochar itself is more that's relatively inert carbon, but you will still need the active pool, which
Yeah.
actually feeds the microorganism, which is important for structure, soil structure, and so on, which is not necessarily provided by biochar now.
No, that's why we absolutely recommend co-composting it before amending it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the losses of those will at one point plateau. So the losses and the gains of the
loss of what?
The loss through basically the natural loss, the natural level of carbon in the soil.
Well, that's interesting because biochar itself is highly resilient to being lost because the microbes don't decompose it. And furthermore, biochar that is co-composted and is coated with organics actually has microorganisms that are actually adding to those organics in a continuous cycle. So they actually are showing resilience to losing the organic component of the biochar that's been co-composted. So we're seeing some pretty interesting research on that. Yeah. So there's actual what they call negative priming, right? So negative priming means the microbiology is actually increasing the carbon content of the soil over time with biochar in the soil, if you can believe that. But that's what the research is telling us.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
So does that answer your question, Dieter?
Yeah, it does. It does. I was more referring to, with the, I mean, I think it does. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rob.
You're so welcome. Okay.
Yeah, great questions, everyone. So here's
Are we missing it?
Yeah, there was somebody asking. They asked about biochar and wildfire fuel mitigation projects, but you did mention Fire Smart a little bit earlier, and that being an option.
That's a source of feedstock. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have a question here. Would it be possible to make biochar out of hemp stalks?
Very possible. Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. It's not the ideal because hemp is going to have a higher ash content and a lower carbon content. It's more of a herbaceous material than a woody material. So, it's just going to have a higher ash content, lower carbon content, biochar.
So maybe not the most efficient material to use to make biochar, but you can still do it. Yeah.
Yeah, still be done. Yeah.
You can still do it.
And it's being done. It is being done.
Okay. Okay, so are there any resources you would recommend for building or creating your own small scale kiln for creating biochar on farm? Is this possible?
It is possible. There are those systems out there. As much as I would love this to be an easy thing to do and to everybody to be able to build their own biochar units, the problem with that is that, as I said, 70% of the energy value of the feedstock is in the syngases that come off. And so when the smaller the scale of the system, the less likely that you will conserve that energy value of the feedstock. And in fact, all of the small scale systems that I know about do not conserve the energy value of the syngases they're just combusted, they're incinerated. And that's because it's very difficult to make use of that syngas energy while you're making biochar at a small scale. It requires a certain scale to be able to add the capital cost of conserving the syngas as an energy product. So I don't really recommend small scale, although it would be good for learning, experimental biochar amounts, not necessarily for commercial. To make it a commercial activity.
All right. And then I just have someone, here's a question, joining us. They were late to join. You asked if we were going to be sharing a recording of the presentation. Tammy, yes, we are. I'll be uploading this to YouTube in the coming week, probably. So you can check out the entire recording there. And Rob is also going to share his PDF slides with us too in an email. So I'll be sending those out to everyone when I share the link for the YouTube. So if you missed some of it, or if you have to leave early, we are recording the whole thing, so you can check back with us and pick up where you left off for sure. Just a few other, there's just a comment here from Nicole about the 2 Billion Trees program, part of a larger federal climate solution funding program. The agriculture complement is Agriculture Climate Solutions, aka Living Labs, which promotes regenerative ag principles, as Rob was illustrating. I didn't know about that program actually, so I'm really glad that you shared that with all of us. I'll have to look into that.
Yes, so Nicole, I could speak just into that. I mean, we are interested in the Agricultural Climate Solutions, the Living Laboratory program. It does require a nonprofit to be the applicant for those. And it actually requires a contingent of organizations to come together in a participatory manner. And so we're absolutely interested in being involved in that sort of thing. We actually looked into that, and we've been monitoring that program. So it may actually include a potential for an Indigenous involvement. So majority-owned Indigenous organizations can be collaborative in living laboratories, and that's another thing that we're looking at. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for sure. And thank you to everyone else who asked questions. The questions at the end, they always enrich the conversation. So thank you all so much for asking all these questions. I feel like we covered so many different sides of this conversation. So thanks everyone.
So I will get some of these materials. In fact, I'll even send a video on the conversion of hemp into biochar.
Okay, that'd be great.
Question.
Just to kind of summarize our some of the topics that we talked about in the Q&A, because we touched on a lot of things. So I'll just leave it one last chance to anyone who has a question. You can either unmute yourself and ask Rob now while we have him on the call, or you can enter it into the chat box as well. Just give everyone one last chance.
Anyone who felt their question was missed, they can have a chance to.
That too. If anyone needs,
put it in the chat box again, or open up to the mic.
Looks like there's just some happy comments about the presentation. So lots of people just saying thanks for the great presentation, Rob.
All right. Okay.
Thanks for your time. Great. So it looks like that's it for questions. So Rob, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today, and answering all our questions on biochar. And to everyone still on the call, we will send an email to you soon with some of this, some of the PDFs, the link to the YouTube, and some of these articles and links that we're talking about here in the Q&A. So there's
a great one at the very end here.
Is there?
Come up. Yeah, and it's a really good summary of the whole presentation. But yes, and it's absolutely, if you can achieve a healthy soil microbial population, fungi, dominated is even better in the soil. That creates a very healthy soil food web. I'm not suggesting that you need biochar to achieve that. Sometimes you can do it with just a very good composting regimen, but the biochar can help that composting regimen to be that much more resilient. So, and increase carbon content faster. So that was just the nature of the question by this one last person. So anyway,
perfect.
Okay. So I can stop sharing, I guess, at this point as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rob. Thanks for everyone that's still with us, and we'll be in touch soon with some more info. If anyone has a question that pops up at the end, you can email me. You can get in touch with Rob, and we can carry on the conversation. Thanks again, Rob. And have a great day, everyone. Take care.